Graduation ceremonies are supposed to be predictable, polished. They follow a script. Cue the orchestra, cue the speeches, cue the proud parents in the audience holding bouquets wrapped in cellophane. And at Lincoln High School, nestled just outside a town where nothing ever made national news, things were always done by the book. The program had been printed 2 weeks in advance. The front row was assigned to donors and PTA presidents. The principal, Mr. Kent, stood by the podium like a conductor waiting to cue his orchestra. Everything was arranged to perfection. Except one thing. In the 10th row from the back, 3 seats in from the aisle, sat a woman who didn't fit the day's immaculate aesthetic. She wore a denim jacket. Faded. Frayed in the corners. On the left breast pocket, a patch had been stitched by hand, olive green canvas with a single word embroidered in small, tidy letters, Guide. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, not because of fashion, but because she hated the way it tickled her neck. Her boots were dusty. Her hands, folded calmly in her lap, bore the marks of a mechanic, stained at the creases, fingertips rough. Her name was June Maddox. And today, she was just another mother at graduation, or so she tried to be. Her son Ethan was valedictorian. Smart, kind, and dead serious about never letting his mother work a double shift again. He'd earned scholarships, medals, offers from 3 top schools. But none of that mattered more than this day. This ceremony. The one where he finally got to say, in front of the whole town, "She did this. She raised me." June didn't plan to speak. She didn't even want to be noticed. But some people don't get to choose how the world sees them. At 10:48 a.m., just 12 minutes before the ceremony was set to begin, 2 uniformed guards approached her row. "Ma'am," one said, gently tapping her shoulder, "we're gonna have to ask you to move. These seats are for district partners and invited guests." June looked up, confused but calm. "My son's name is on the program," she said, holding it up. "Valedictorian? Ethan Maddox. This is where his invitation placed me." The younger of the guards hesitated, glancing down at a crumpled sheet with scribbled notes. "We understand, but there's been an adjustment. You're welcome to sit toward the back, near the auxiliary seating." She stared at them. Not angry. Just disappointed. Like someone who'd seen this play out before and already knew the ending. "I'm not moving," she said plainly. That would have been the end of it, had not Bellamy been watching. Cynthia Bellamy, mother of Grace Bellamy, runner-up valedictorian and top donor's daughter, sat in the 4th row fanning herself with a monogrammed program. She leaned toward Principal Kent and whispered something sharp, gesturing toward June's row. Within minutes, a coordinator, clipboard in hand and panic in her eyes, approached the guards and whispered something that made them visibly uncomfortable. One step forward again. "Ma'am, please. We don't want a scene." June stood this time. Slowly. Not to fight. Not to argue. Just to keep her dignity from shrinking. "I'm not here for a scene," she said. "I'm here for my son." It could have gone further. It might have turned ugly. But something else happened. From across the field, past the rows of suited staff and seated graduates, a few eyes began to shift. It started as a murmur, a soft ripple moving through the crowd like wind in tall grass. Somewhere near the west edge of the open-air assembly, footsteps could be heard. Heavy. Steady. Purposeful. Shoes on gravel. And then from the tree-lined entrance of the school's rear lot, 6 men appeared. Tall. Broad. Dressed not in military gear but in simple, clean suits. Their movements were in sync, not rehearsed but ingrained. They walked with that unmistakable purpose that only comes from years of discipline. They didn't look at the audience. They didn't smile. They just walked. Straight toward the 10th row. Straight toward June. People turned. Teachers squinted. Bellamy froze mid-sentence. The guards stepped back instinctively, not in fear, but in recognition of something bigger than themselves. As if their training had taught them enough to know when the room no longer belonged to them. The first of the 6 reached June and nodded. Not a greeting, a confirmation. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cloth square, the same green as the patch on June's jacket. He handed it to the nearest usher, who didn't know what to do but took it anyway. Then the man turned, facing the stage. And in a voice that cut clean through the still air, he said, "We came to honor the woman who taught us to survive when most men would have quit. We call her guide. You call her a mother. Either way, she doesn't sit in the back." And just like that, every plan, every seating chart, every whisper of politics or hierarchy, shattered like glass. Ethan hadn't seen the commotion from behind the stage. But when he finally stepped to the podium a half-hour later, he paused, looked out, and saw them. 6 men standing at ease behind the 10th row. His mother, seated between them. No longer overlooked. No longer erased. Just seen. And this was only the beginning. Ethan Maddox stood at the podium, hands gripping the sides like they were lifelines. The crowd had finally settled, but not in the usual way. This wasn't the routine quiet that comes before a valedictorian speech. This silence felt anticipatory. Like the whole stadium was holding its breath. His speech was tucked neatly in the folder in front of him. Typed. Revised a dozen times. Approved by the school board. But as he glanced down at the neat rows of black ink, something shifted. He looked up. Not at the principal. Not at the row of honored donors. But directly at the 10th row. At his mother. Still seated calmly, jacket collar turned up slightly against the breeze. The seals flanking her like pillars of something unshakable. People weren't fidgeting now. They were staring. Listening. Maybe for the first time that day. Ethan took a breath. "When I was asked to write this speech," he began, voice clear but low, "I thought about what people wanted to hear. Achievement. Determination. Excellence. The words we frame and hang on the walls of this school." A few nods from the front row. The principal smiled. "But I realize something. Words like excellence and determination, they don't come from textbooks. They're not born in boardrooms or captured by GPAs. They come from people. People who never get thanked." Now a ripple. He closed the folder. No one told him to, but it was the kind of gesture that demanded attention. The kind you don't unsee. "My mom," Ethan said, "didn't sit in the front row today. Not because she wasn't invited, but because someone decided she didn't belong there." You could feel the shift in the crowd, that prickling discomfort when a speech breaks tradition. She worked 3 jobs. Fixed cars at night. Taught herself survival techniques to train the very men standing here with her. And yet someone still thought she wasn't polished enough to sit among the important people. A few heads turned. Principal Kent shifted in his seat. Bellamy's lips thinned, her eyes locked on the stage. "I wasn't raised by privilege," Ethan continued. "I was raised by resilience. By scraped knuckles and engine grease. By someone who knew more about loyalty, honor, and grit than anyone in this school's history." You could hear a pin drop. She doesn't need applause. Never asked for it. But if this school teaches anything worth carrying into the world, then let today be remembered as the day we stop pretending value only wears a suit. That line hit like thunder. The students behind him, the ones who'd spent years navigating GPA points and parental expectations, began clapping first. Then the back rows. Then, slowly, the wave spread forward. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't obligatory. It was something else. Ethan stepped back, eyes never leaving his mother's. She didn't cry. That wasn't her style. But her hand tightened over the patch on her jacket, thumb brushing the edge like she was grounding herself. Remembering. Feeling seen. And for once, the woman who had trained warriors, mended engines, and raised a son into a man, was no longer invisible. The applause faded eventually. And the ceremony went on, technically. The next student speaker was introduced, scholarships were announced, photos were taken. But everything that came after felt like a postscript. Because no one forgot the moment Ethan closed his folder and told the truth. Afterward, the field turned into chaos. Students tossing caps. Parents snapping photos. Balloons bobbing above flower bouquets. Everyone pretending things had returned to normal. But nothing had. Because by the time the last name was called, June Maddox had become more than just the woman in the jacket. She had become the ripple. Behind the stage, Principal Kent cornered one of the event organizers, voice low and furious. "Who let those men in?" "They weren't on the list," the assistant stammered. "But we couldn't stop them, sir. They had credentials. Military clearance." Kent rubbed his forehead. "I don't care what they had. That speech, that moment, it made a mockery of our—" A tap on his shoulder. He turned mid-sentence. One of the 6 men, the one with silver streaks at his temples and the calm stare of a man who'd seen war, was standing behind him. "Mockery?" the SEAL asked, voice even. Kent blanched. "I didn't. I mean the schedule." "She trained us," the man interrupted. "Not officially. Not through the Pentagon. But if there's one reason I made it out of a mud-slick hellhole in Kandahar, it's because of her. Because of the jacket. Because of what she taught." The principal swallowed. "I didn't realize she—" "You didn't ask," the SEAL said. "No one did." And then he walked away, calm as a tide, back to June's side. Back at her truck, a beat-up Chevy that rattled at stop signs, June sat quietly. Ethan rode shotgun, diploma resting on the dash. Either of them spoke for a while. The hum of the engine was enough. "I didn't know they were coming," she finally said. "I didn't know I was going to say any of that," Ethan replied. She looked over. "It needed to be said?" He nodded. "Yeah." And in the rearview mirror, the school shrank behind them, just a building now. Nothing more. But in that building, something had shifted. A truth had cracked the surface. And the ripples were only just beginning. That night, long after the graduates had scattered to pizza parlors and dinner reservations, June Maddox sat on her porch with a mug of black coffee and the jacket in her lap. It was older than most of the parents at the ceremony, canvas faded, elbow seams threadbare, collar permanently turned from years of weather and wear. But to June, it was more than fabric. It was her uniform. Not because anyone issued it to her. Not because she ever swore an oath in front of a flag. But because that jacket had seen her through battles no one ever thanked her for. Fixing engines in winter. Teaching combat medics how to stabilize a wound with a wrench and duct tape when supplies ran out. Patching up neighborhood kids whose parents were too proud to go to the ER. And most importantly, raising a boy into a man in a world that tried to keep both of them small. Tonight, though, the jacket didn't feel like armor. It felt like a flag someone had finally saluted. Inside the house, Ethan was still in his shirt and tie, pacing like he couldn't quite land back on Earth. The ceremony had ended, but something about the day kept playing on a loop in his head. The guards. The insult. The silence. And then, the stand. He replayed every step, every word of the speech, wondering if it had been too much. Wondering if it had actually changed anything. Then he heard it. A car pulling into the driveway. Tires on gravel. A door slamming. Ethan peeked through the curtain. It was Hartley. The sniper. The one with the 1,000-yard stare and a handshake that could fold steel. He was alone, now out of uniform. Just jeans and a Henley. But he walked with the same discipline, like every inch of him was still trained for danger. Ethan stepped out onto the porch just as June looked up. Hartley paused. Then held out something. A small package. Square. Wrapped in brown paper. Tied with string. June took it silently, then nodded for him to sit. He did, easing onto the top step like he'd been there 100 times before. "I watched 6 men hold formation for you today," Ethan said quietly. Hartley nodded. "We would have brought more if we knew what they were gonna try." June looked at him sideways. "You didn't come for me. You came because you thought something might go wrong." Hartley shrugged. "We've seen enough towns that bury their best people. Thought maybe this one needed reminding." She opened the package. Inside was a single patch, identical to the one inside her jacket, except one change. In gold thread below the word guide, someone had added a new line. Honorary command. June's fingers tightened over the edge of the patch. You don't have to wear it, Hartley said. We just thought someone ought to say it out loud. June stared at the patch for a long moment, then closed the box and set it beside her coffee mug. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Hartley understood. Some things didn't require words. They just needed to be true. Word of the incident spread quietly, like smoke under a door. The school never released an official statement. No apology. No names. Just the usual post-ceremony article about achievement and excellence. But in the margins, something else was happening. A teacher posted Ethan's speech on Facebook. Another printed it out and taped it to the window of their classroom. Parents started whispering about the woman in the jacket, first in hushed tones, then with admiration. And when the Daily Sentinel ran a feature 2 weeks later titled, The Quiet Hero Behind the Podium, they didn't name June until the third paragraph, but when they did, the town finally paused. Because for once, it wasn't a headline about tax increases or sports rankings. It was about legacy. About grit. About the kind of woman who never asked for credit, but who had shaped more lives than any donor the school ever praised. Bellamy never spoke publicly about what happened. She didn't resign from the PTA. Not right away. But she did start showing up less. Skipping meetings. Excusing herself early. And Principal Kent? He announced his early retirement by the end of the summer. Something about a sabbatical. Travel plans. Personal wellness. But everyone knew the truth. A high school doesn't survive long on empty banners and plastic plaques when its own students learn to speak louder than tradition. Later that summer, Ethan started a blog. Nothing fancy. Just a free site with a white background and a banner that said, Notes from the Back Row. The posts were short. Stories about what it meant to grow up invisible. What it felt like to watch someone you love get stepped over again and again. What courage looked like when it wasn't loud. And how sometimes the quietest people teach you the loudest lessons. Readers came in slowly at first. Then faster. Emails from other towns. Comments from soldiers. Teachers. Single parents. Kids who said they recognized the woman in the jacket, because they had one too. One reader wrote, This story reminded me my mother wasn't weak, she was working 2 jobs while the world looked the other way. Another, I was that kid in the folding chair. Watching. Wishing someone would say what you said. Thank you? Ethan didn't reply to most comments. He didn't need to. He just kept writing. Because the world didn't need another spotlight. It needed a mirror. By the time the leaves began to change and the back-to-school banners were hoisted on light poles around town, no one mentioned the incident aloud anymore. Not in the official meetings. Not in the newsletters. The school rebranded the graduation as a success, pointing to increased press coverage and higher community engagement as proof. But underneath the surface, everything was shifting. Small shifts. Quiet ones. But they mattered. It started with a teacher, Ms. Darley, History Department, Room 204. She was one of the few who hadn't clapped politely during Ethan's speech. She clapped like she meant it. Like she'd been waiting years to hear someone say those words. In early September, she added a framed quote above her whiteboard. It wasn't attributed. It didn't need to be. Some people don't need invitations to belong. They make space by being exactly who they are. When a student asked where it came from, she just smiled and said, From someone who earned every inch of respect she ever got. Then came the Maddox recognition. No press release. No ceremony. Just a motion passed quietly at the first PTA meeting of the year. It was Bellamy's replacement, a younger mother named Clara, who suggested it. An award for unseen service, she said. For the parents who don't show up in designer blazers. The ones who work late but still find time to help. Who don't volunteer for the photo ops, but make the bake sale happen anyway. There was a pause. A few people exchanged looks. Then someone clapped. And the motion passed. Unanimously. The first recipient was a janitor who'd repaired a broken AC unit on his day off. The second was a cafeteria worker who started bringing homemade soup for kids who never brought lunch. No big speech. Just an envelope. A nod. Quiet applause. Exactly the way June would have wanted it. Back on their street, life for June and Ethan slowed down. She returned to her garage. Rebuilding alternators. Changing oil. Teaching a neighbor kid named Trevor how to fix a rusted-out Honda Civic with only a socket wrench and elbow grease. "You're teaching me how to survive," he said once, sweat dripping off his forehead. June smirked, handed him a wrench. "No," she said. "I'm teaching you how to stop asking permission." Trevor didn't quite understand then. But he would. Eventually. The 6 seals didn't fade from the picture either. Every few weeks, one of them would stop by. Sometimes to drop off parts. Sometimes to sit in the back of the garage and just exist. Not needing to talk. Not needing to explain. They knew what that space was. What June had built, without a blueprint, without backup, without any rank beside her name. A place where people didn't have to prove they mattered. They just did. One day, Ethan found her in the backyard, sitting on an upside-down bucket with grease under her nails and a half-finished carburetor beside her boots. He had his laptop under one arm and a letter in his hand. "It's from the school board," he said. June didn't look up. "They want me to speak again," Ethan continued. "Next year's graduation." June wiped her hands on a rag. Still didn't speak. "I told them no," he said. That made her glance up. "Why?" she asked. Ethan set the laptop down. "Because my part's done. I said what needed to be said. It's someone else's turn now." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" He smiled. "Yeah. I'm sure." She nodded once. Proud. But not surprised. Because she hadn't raised a boy to chase spotlights. She'd raised a man who understood when to step aside. And when to lift others. At that year's graduation, there was one small change. No announcement. No sign. Just a single empty chair in the front row. Padded. Plain. Facing the stage. No plaque. No dedication. Just a chair. Some students ignored it. Some whispered. But when one brave kid raised his hand and asked the principal what it was for, a teacher near the back row stood up and said, "It's for someone who never needed an invitation to belong." The room went silent. And stayed that way just long enough to feel like reverence. Back in the Maddox house, the jacket stayed in her drawer. Folded neatly. Patch still intact. June never wore it again. Not because it didn't matter. But because it did. And real power doesn't always walk loud. Sometimes it leans over an engine and teaches a kid how to survive. Sometimes it sits quietly at a graduation and listens without the need to be introduced. Sometimes it raises a son who can say things the world doesn't want to hear, and say them anyway. One evening, as summer began to wind down and the smell of cut grass filled the air, June and Ethan stood outside their garage watching the sky turn amber. He leaned against the doorframe. She leaned against the toolbox. The world felt slower now. Not smaller. Just clearer. "You think people really change?" Ethan asked suddenly. June didn't answer right away. She reached for an old towel, wiped her hands, looked out at the quiet road stretching past the trees. "Some don't," she said finally. "But the ones who matter?" She smiled. "Yeah. They do. And somewhere across the town, in libraries and classrooms, in blog comments and whispered stories, in the quiet breath between insult and defiance, her truth still echoed. Not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. By the end of the year, Ethan's blog had gone from a personal outlet to a small movement. It wasn't flashy. No viral videos. No sponsors. Just raw reflections, written in quiet moments, under the dim porch light, often with June humming softly in the background as she wiped down her tools. He didn't write about the seals. He didn't write about the guards or Bellamy or the red-faced principal. He wrote about silence. About resilience. About the power of people who show up without needing to be seen. And something in that quiet honesty struck a chord. A teacher from Wisconsin wrote, "I laminated your speech. My students take turns reading it aloud every semester." A retired Army nurse commented, "June reminds me of women I served with. You never saw them coming, but when things went sideways, they were the ones who got us out alive." Another reply simply read, "I didn't know how much I needed this until I read it." The blog gained traction in small towns, military forums, parent groups. But it wasn't the clicks that mattered. It was the echo. The way her story, her truth, refused to be buried again. Even in places that tried not to remember. Back at the school, the chair remained. 1 year. Then 2. Somewhere along the way, students stopped asking what it was for. They just accepted it, like a landmark that had always been there. But teachers? They knew. They remembered the day a woman in a mechanic's jacket stood taller than anyone else in that building. Not with words, but with presence. Principal Kent officially retired the summer after Ethan's graduation. The local paper called it a planned departure. Those who'd seen his face during the speech, flushed, silent, refusing to look at June, knew better. His office was taken over by a woman named Terry Chow, a former science teacher. No nonsense. Fair. Honest. In her first week, she walked through the school, noting every photo in every hallway. At the far end of the east wing, where the honors wall was kept, she paused at a missing spot between 2 frames. When the assistant principal asked what she was thinking, she just pointed and said, "We're missing someone." That fall, a new framed photo appeared. It wasn't flashy. Just a grainy still from the graduation video. Ethan at the podium, June in the background, flanked by 6 seals. Underneath, a caption in small print. "The woman in the jacket, some foundations are built in silence." No one complained. Not even the board. Maybe because they finally understood. Or maybe because they knew better than to test the weight of the story behind that frame. Ethan moved out the following year, not far, just 2 towns over for college. Mechanical engineering. Full scholarship. But he came home often. Not just for holidays, but on random Thursdays when the wind reminded him of the porch. Or on long weekends when he missed the smell of motor oil and cornbread. June didn't say much when he came back. She didn't have to. She'd been the anchor too long to ask why the boat returned to shore. One night, while Ethan was home for spring break, they sat on the tailgate of her truck eating leftover burgers and watching the stars. June sipped from an old thermos. Ethan tossed a balled-up napkin toward the grass. "I've been thinking," he said. She glanced sideways. "I want to start a foundation." Her brow raised. "For kids," he continued. "For the ones like Trevor. The ones no one sees. I'll call it the Maddox Fund." June snorted lightly. "That name's already being used." Ethan grinned. "Then maybe it's time someone made it official." She didn't smile. Not at first. But her eyes softened in the dark. She reached over, adjusted the collar of his hoodie the same way she used to fix his tie before middle school band concerts. "Do it," she said. And that was all the approval he needed. A few months later, a young girl knocked on June's garage door. She wore grease-stained jeans and had a look in her eyes that said she'd learned how to stay invisible just to survive. She didn't say much at first, just asked if June taught people how to fix things. June looked at her hands. Thin wrists. Dirt under her nails. "You got a car?" The girl nodded. "My brother's. He left it when he went away." June wiped her palms on her rag, gestured inside. "Then let's fix it. No questions. No forms. Just a place to belong. Just like always." In town, stories about the woman in the jacket began to take on a quiet mythos. No one exaggerated. No one needed to. Because the truth was powerful enough. There were whispers that she once trained SEAL teams without ever joining the military. That she once rebuilt an ambulance engine by candlelight during a power outage. That when the high school's generator failed during a winter storm, she fixed it in under 30 minutes, without asking who was in charge. All of them were true. And still, she never asked for a thing. Not credit. Not thanks. Just the space to do what needed doing. Then came the letter. From the Secretary of the Navy. It arrived in a plain envelope, delivered by hand. Inside, a certificate of honorary distinction. Awarded for contributions to Special Operations Readiness and Training. And a short note in black ink. For the instructor we never got to salute properly. Until now. There was a line for her to sign, to accept a formal commendation at a national ceremony in D.C. June read it. Folded it. Put it in the same drawer as the patch with the golden thread. And left it there. Not out of pride. But out of peace. She didn't need a podium. She'd already had one moment of being seen. And for a woman who'd gone decades without that, one moment was enough to last a lifetime. By the time Ethan finished college, the Maddox Fund had awarded scholarships to 19 students. Not the ones with perfect grades or glowing resumes. The ones who showed up early, stayed late, helped others, and never asked for recognition. The kind of kids June would have noticed. The kind of kids who knew what it meant to be overlooked, and rose anyway. Every award was delivered in person, by Ethan himself, in a simple envelope with a handwritten letter. Inside each letter, he ended with the same sentence. Someone once taught me that you don't need to be seen to matter, but I see you. Most recipients never wrote back. But those who did, they didn't just thank him. They told him stories. About grandmothers who taught them how to fix flat tires before they could drive. About single moms who packed 2 lunches so they could share with a hungry classmate. About mentors who didn't fit in boardrooms or faculty lounges but who showed up, every single time, in ways that counted. In a quiet way, the fund didn't just help kids, it revealed how many Junes were out there. Hidden in plain sight. People who held the world together without ever asking the world to notice. One day, Ethan came home and found June sitting on the porch, staring out at the road. She hadn't said much that week. But she hadn't stopped moving either. Still helped fix a neighbor's transmission. Still dropped off soup to the old couple 3 houses down. Still kept going. But tonight something was different. She was still. And Ethan, now a man grown, sat beside her like he used to, a kid with muddy sneakers and big questions. Mom, he asked, do you think they remember? June didn't answer immediately. She looked at the road. At the dust settling under the dusk. And then she said, they tried not to. But it's too late. It happened. Ethan smiled softly. You're not just the woman in the jacket anymore. June turned, her eyes gentle. I never was. And in that quiet, it made sense. She hadn't changed. The world had simply looked long enough to see what had been there all along. Years passed. The school grew. New buildings. A bigger auditorium. Updated banners. A digital hall of fame. But the chair stayed. Every graduation. Front row. Padded. Plain. Still without a plaque. Still facing the stage. And even when no one mentioned it, even when the staff changed and younger teachers stepped in, the tradition held. One year, a student asked about it again. The teacher, new to the district, just 3 months in, didn't know. But an older custodian overheard. He walked over, wiped his hands on a rag, and said, It's for someone who built the foundation. The student frowned. What foundation? The custodian smiled. The one we're all standing on. June never returned to the school. Not even when they asked her to. Not when a commemorative mural was proposed. Not when they sent an invitation for a lifetime community honor. She read them all. Folded them. Put them in the same drawer as the navy letter and the patch with the golden thread. Because what mattered most had already been said, years ago, when her son leaned down, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "We made it." That was the only ceremony she needed. She got older, of course. Her hands, once steady with bolts and wiring, grew slower. The truck didn't run quite like it used to. But the garage still stayed open. Kids still came. Some just needed help with brakes. Others needed help staying alive. And June, even in her 60s, still knew how to fix both. Without asking permission. Without waiting for recognition. With that same quiet gravity that had once brought 6 SEALs to their feet. One afternoon, a new kid, nervous, wiry, 17 maybe, walked into her garage. He stared at the ground, holding a carburetor in both hands like it might fall apart. "I heard you teach people," he said. June looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "I heard I do too." He stepped forward, voice shaking. "Is that true? That you once trained Navy SEALs?" June didn't look up. She pointed to a wrench on the table. "Grab that." The kid hesitated. Then obeyed. And as she knelt beside him to show him where the carburetor fit, she said, "I didn't train them. I just didn't let them quit." The kid blinked. June tightened the bolt and added, "Same thing, really." The story of the woman in the jacket never got a movie deal. No best-selling memoir. No bronze statue on Main Street. But in homes across the country, taped to refrigerators, posted in break rooms, pinned to vision boards, her story lived on. Not because it was flashy, but because it was true. And in a world full of noise, that truth was enough to echo for a very, very long time. One evening, as the sun fell low over the tree-line, Ethan, now older, his hair streaked with the first signs of silver, sat alone on the porch. June's chair beside him was empty. But not lonely. Her jacket still hung by the door. The garage still smelled faintly of oil and wildflowers. And the town still remembered, even if only in glimpses, in stories, in whispered thanks passed from one quiet voice to another. He looked up at the stars, like they had on so many nights before, and whispered aloud, "Do you think people really change?" The wind stirred. The crickets sang. And from somewhere unseen, in the marrow of the air, in the roots of the earth, came the answer. "The ones who matter do." Thanks for riding the emotional roller coaster with Voice of Tales. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, and buckle up for the next one. It's even twistier.